Mastermind, Strategist for Hire, written by Clouds, My Head in the Clouds, Not Coming Down, and read by Eleanor Elizabeth. Chapter 4, Embracing the Role. It had been 6 months since Izuku's fateful encounter with All Might. It seemed a lot longer to Izuku. A lot had changed since he was a bright-eyed kid holding on to a dream of being a hero. He'd learned a lot about computers and hacking to help with his villain work, and was planning to go to a high school that emphasized programming. He still did most of his villain work in an internet cafe, but moved around frequently to prevent being tracked. He also tried picking up as much as he could about money laundering to prevent anyone from tracking his funds. His prices went up with each plan he set out, and he was yet to reach a point where his clients refused to pay. He had also been cleaning Dogaba Beach. It started as a way to deal with his guilt over becoming a villain. Maybe if he did something good for the community, it would cancel out the harm he caused. Izuku was gradually coming to terms with his new life, letting his bitterness at society combine with his pride at a job well done to drown out his regret. He didn't get panic attacks anymore when he opened the news and saw that one of his plans had been carried out. He still got nervous and somewhat nauseous, but even that was getting replaced with satisfaction. It didn't hurt that every message in his inbox fed his ego, as villains were constantly thanking him or demanding his services. For the first time in his life, he had people who didn't think he was useless. It was like a drug, and Izuku couldn't get enough of it. So far, he'd sold the murder plans for 10 heroes, and that wasn't even counting the numerous robberies, non-hero assassinations, and other crimes that he planned. But people were starting to catch on. Conspiracy theorists online were starting to connect the recent uptick in hero deaths, and even the police were starting to suspect that there might be one person behind it. Villains were starting to come to him with higher profile targets, but were also starting to demand face-to-face meetings, rather than just through a screen. Which is why he never stopped cleaning the beach. He knew that one act of good wouldn't make up for the bad he'd done, and he was getting to the point where he didn't want it to. But it was excellent muscle training, and he needed to be strong if he expected to survive in the world of villains. Izuku caught movement out of the corner of his eye as he hefted a microwave and began to carry it towards the dumpster. He had started to suspect this morning, but now he was sure he was being followed, which meant that someone had managed to figure out that he was Mastermind. Only question was, who? Izuku continued his task without letting on that he knew that he was being watched, opting instead to keep an eye out and get a description of his stalker. Hopefully it was a villain. Izuku didn't know quite what he'd do if the heroes caught onto his identity this early in the game, so yeah, hopefully a villain. Izuku had to resist chuckling to himself. What has his life become? By the time he left the beach at sundown, he discovered that his stalker was a middle-aged man with grey hair, a goatee, and apparently a love of cheap suits and cigarettes. He was pretty good at staying out of sight, but Izuku had years of experience hiding from bullies, and more recently, stalking heroes himself. He breathed a sigh of relief. This guy was almost definitely not a hero. But if he had managed to find Izuku, he must have significant connections in the underground. Izuku made a note to check his notebook when he got home. Izuku had become much more paranoid since he'd thrown himself into villainy. Call it a combination of a guilty conscience and an anxiety disorder, or whatever, but the end result was that Izuku was neurotically careful when it came to not getting caught. He had an irrational fear that somehow a cop would try posing as one of his clients online, get him to send them a murder plan for a hero, then somehow use the IP address to track him back and take him to jail. Yeah, maybe Izuku had been watching too many crime dramas, but it could happen. Anyway, he'd started to learn as much as he could about the villain underground, so that he could reasonably vet his clients. It helped that he'd started asking about his clients' quirks and skill sets, so that he could incorporate them into his plans. But a majority of information came from the dark net, and hacking into some of the less secure police databases. Just like he had notebooks for information on heroes, now he had them on villains, and it came in handy in unexpected ways. One client a few weeks ago had commissioned him to help their group rob a casino. It was a difficult job with a big payout, so Izuku only demanded part of his fee up front. After the job was done, he messaged the client about the rest of his money, and had gotten the response, "Thanks, but you should be lucky with what you've got, and you're not getting any more from us." Idiots, really. He'd vetted them beforehand and checked their quirks against the police registry, so he knew who they were, where they lived, and most importantly, their weaknesses. In the midst of his fuming, it hadn't taken him long to find a few villains with a grudge against their little group. Turns out, Izuku wasn't the only one these guys had tried to screw over. It was a little harder to find out how to contact their enemies, but once he did, they seemed more than happy to pay Izuku for the chance to take them down. Needless to say, no one had tried to cheat Mastermind out of his fee since. It came in handy now, though, as he looked through descriptions of various known villains in an attempt to figure out who was following him. The guy didn't have an obvious quirk, from what he could see, but who would have a reason to come after him? A previous client? No dice. Izuku continued rifling through the pages until... bingo. Giran. A broker. Izuku leaned back in his chair. Of course. The name nagged at him, though, like he should be more familiar with this guy than just a passing entry in his journal. His eye skimmed over the notes, lingering on the known connections list when a note in the margin caught his eye. More specifically, a username. Oh, right. Giran was the broker who'd reached out to him online a few times early on, offering to arrange meetings with big-name players in the villain world and provide any necessary gear. Izuku had soundly refused. He'd been so new to the game when Giran had reached out that he hadn't yet grown comfortable with calling himself a villain. He'd been so scared. One of the main reasons he liked working online was that his skills could speak for themselves. He had a sneaking suspicion that Mastermind's credibility would tank the moment word got out that he was just a quirkless teenager. Things are different now, Izuku mused. Yeah, I'm still a quirkless teenager, but at least I've gotten used to the fact that I'm a villain now. I've got a reputation. A big reputation, if the copycat masterminds popping up to sell inferior plans was anything to go by. A reputation I need to uphold. So far, Izuku had been able to take care of the copycats fairly quickly, using the same methods he'd used for cheating clients, but one can never be too careful. Maybe it's finally time to start showing a physical presence. And with that, Izuku pulled out a notebook and began to make plans. Hey guys, it's Ella, and I hope you are all still having a lovely day today. I know, I'm putting up another chapter, but the last one was quite short and I couldn't upload it after I finished recording it because I was away at Comic-Con. So I thought I'd hop in, record an extra one and put it up today. So be sure to like it if you liked it and get down in the comments and we can have a chat. You know, I love talking to all of you. And be sure to subscribe if you want to be notified every time that I make new videos. But until I see you again, be sure to practice some self-care. Drink your water, brush your teeth, get the right amount of sleep. And yes, that is a threat. And I will catch you laters.